Rain lashed against the neon lights of a quiet diner on the edge of Route 17, a lonely stretch of highway where truckers, bikers, and the broken-hearted often found their way. Inside, the smell of bacon grease and coffee hung thick in the air. The clock above the counter blinked past midnight, and the place was nearly empty, except for 3 leather-clad bikers at the corner booth, and a weary-looking man in a faded army jacket sitting alone by the window. The man's name was Ethan Cole. Early 40s, eyes tired but kind, hands rough and scarred. He stirred the last of his coffee, watching the rain trickle down the glass. Across the table sat a paper bag, filled with a half-eaten burger and fries. The waitress, a woman named Darla, had boxed them up a few minutes earlier when she noticed Ethan pushing his plate away. Lost in thought. "You sure you're done with that?" she'd asked with her usual small-town warmth. "Yeah," he'd said softly. "Could I take the leftovers with me? For my daughter." Something about the way he said, "my daughter," caught Darla's attention. There was a softness there, a longing wrapped in exhaustion. She smiled, packed it up neatly, and said, "Course you can, honey." She's lucky to have a dad who thinks about her this late. Now, as Ethan waited for his check, the laughter from the bikers' booth cut through the hum of the rain. They were loud, drunk maybe, the kind of men who carried trouble in their laughter. Their leader, a burly man with tattoos crawling up his neck, noticed Ethan holding the brown paper bag. "Hey, soldier boy," the biker called out, his voice booming. "What's that, doggy bag for your platoon?" The other 2 chuckled. Ethan didn't respond. He just kept his eyes on the rain, but silence, in places like this, could be louder than words. The leader stood up, swaggering over. His boots thudded heavy on the tiled floor. Darla looked nervous but didn't intervene. She'd seen enough in her years behind that counter to know when a storm was coming. The biker stopped beside Ethan's table, casting a shadow over him. "I asked you a question, pal," he said, voice dripping with mockery. "You too good to answer." Ethan finally looked up, calm and steady. "It's for my daughter," he said quietly. "She hasn't eaten much today." The laughter stopped. The other bikers went still, unsure whether to keep joking or not. The leader tilted his head, smirking. "Your daughter, huh? Where's she at? Waiting in your Harley's sidecar?" Ethan's eyes flickered with something. A flicker of pain, a memory maybe. But his voice stayed even. "She's home. With my sister. I've been trying to find steady work." The biker leaned closer, his breath reeking of beer. "So you're broke and you're feeding your kid diner scraps. Real nice." Darla took a step forward. "Alright, that's enough," she said, her voice shaking just a little. "He ain't bothering nobody." The biker shot her a look, cold and sharp. "Mind your own lady." Ethan stood then, not aggressively, just enough to meet the man's eyes. "She's right," he said. "Let's not make this something it doesn't need to be." For a moment, the tension crackled like the thunder outside. The leader studied him, maybe waiting for fear, maybe hoping for anger. But Ethan's calm was unnerving. It wasn't weakness. It was control, the kind that comes from someone who's already seen the worst life can throw. "You a soldier?" the biker asked after a pause. Ethan hesitated. "Used to be." The man grinned, though there was no humor in it. "Figures. Always some sob story. You guys think wearing the flag gives you a free pass, huh?" One of the other bikers, Ridge, a younger man with uncertain eyes, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Mac, let it go," he muttered. But Mac ignored him. He reached out suddenly, snatching the paper bag off the table. "Let's see what's so special you're saving it for." The bag tore in his hand, fries spilling onto the floor. Ethan froze. His jaw tightened, but he didn't move. He just watched as Mac sneered and dropped the crumpled burger onto the counter. "You done?" Ethan asked softly, voice barely above a whisper. Mac laughed again. But the sound didn't carry far this time. Something in the air had shifted. Like the diner itself was holding its breath. Ethan reached down, picked up the fallen burger, brushed it off with quiet dignity, and put it back into the torn bag. His hands didn't shake. His voice didn't rise. He simply said, "You don't take from a man when it's for his kid. That's a line you don't cross." For a second, Mac looked ready to explode, but before he could speak, Ridge stood up from the booth. "Mac, seriously. Sit down. Now." The words hung heavy. Even Darla looked surprised. Mac's nostrils flared, but he didn't move. Then Ridge said something softer, something that no one else caught. Whatever it was, Mac's expression faltered. He turned, muttered a curse, and stomped back to the booth. Ethan sat again, the rain still tapping softly against the glass. Darla came over quietly, set a fresh cup of coffee in front of him, and whispered, "It's on the house." He nodded in thanks, his voice thick with something unsaid. Outside, thunder rolled again, but inside, the diner fell into silence. A silence not of fear, but of respect. And as Max sat in the corner, staring at his untouched plate, something in his hardened face began to shift. Something that would, before the night was over, change everything. The rain softened to a steady drizzle, streaking the diner windows like faint tears. The clock ticked past 12:30 a.m., and the low hum of the jukebox filled the air again. Some old country song that spoke of lost chances and broken roads. Darla wiped the counter in slow, nervous circles, her eyes darting occasionally toward the corner booth where the bikers sat. Mac hadn't touched his food. Ridge and the third biker, a heavyset man named Tank, whispered quietly, their voices low. Ethan sat alone still, hands wrapped around his coffee mug, gaze distant. His army jacket, faded and worn, bore a single-stitched patch 1st Cavalry Division. It was the kind of insignia that told stories words never could. Darla cleared her throat, forcing a smile as she approached Ethan. "You want me to pack up something fresh for your little girl?" "On the house," she offered softly. He looked up, startled. No, you don't have to. I insist," she said, already reaching for a new plate. "Ain't right for a child to miss dinner." "What's her name?" "Lila," he said, a small warmth flickering across his face. "She's 8. Loves grilled cheese, but she says diner fries taste better than the ones I make." "Ooh," Darla smiled. "Smart girl." From across the room, Mac's voice broke the calm again. "You got a kid, soldier boy, what's she like?" It wasn't a taunt this time. His tone had changed, slower, uncertain. Ethan turned slightly, wary but measured. "She's my whole world," he said simply. Mac leaned back, studying him. The others exchanged glances, they knew that look in Mac's eyes. It wasn't anger anymore, it was recognition. Something buried deep had been stirred. Ridge spoke up first. "You said you used to be in the army," he said cautiously. "How long were you out there?" 13 years. Ethan replied. 2 tours overseas. Lost a few good men. Lost more than I care to count." His eyes drifted toward the window again. "When I came back, everything felt quieter, but not in a good way. Like the world had moved on without me." No one spoke for a moment. Even the sound of the rain seemed to fade. Mac took a long breath, rubbing his palms against his jeans. "You said you got a daughter," he said. "You take care of her alone?" Ethan nodded. "Her mom passed a few years ago. Car accident. Since then, it's just been me and Leela." Darla set down a fresh box of food beside him, her eyes glistening with sympathy. "God bless you, sweetheart," she whispered. Tank shifted uncomfortably, trying to lighten the mood. "Bet she keeps you on your toes, huh?" Ethan chuckled faintly. "She does, she asks too many questions. Wants to know why I can't sleep sometimes. Why I keep her nightlight on even when she says she's not scared anymore." He paused, his voice tightening. "Truth is, I think it's me who needs the light." The bikers looked down, their tough exteriors cracking just slightly. Mac's fingers drummed against the table. "You ever think about what all that fighting does to a man?" he asked quietly. Ethan looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Every day." Something deep flickered in Mac's eyes. "Guilt maybe, or regret. My old man was in Vietnam," he muttered. "Never talked about it. But when he drank, you could see it. Like he was fighting ghosts nobody else could see." Ethan nodded. "War doesn't end when you come home. It just changes uniforms." Ridge looked between them, uneasy with the sudden gravity. "Man, this got heavy real quick." Tank elbowed him gently. "Sometimes heavy's what we need." The diner door creaked as the wind pushed against it, bringing in the scent of wet asphalt. Somewhere outside, a truck's engine roared to life and faded into the distance. Mac finally stood up, grabbing his leather jacket. "Come on, boys. Let's leave the man alone." But instead of heading straight for the door, he stopped beside Ethan's table. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. "I shouldn't have done that," Mac said, his voice gravelly. "With the food, I mean, that was low, I got no excuse." Ethan looked up, surprised. "You don't owe me anything?" "Maybe not," Mac said. "But I owe her. Your kid. You said her name's Leela." Ethan nodded cautiously. Mac reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded bill. It wasn't much, just a 50, crumpled and worn. He laid it beside the paper bag. "Get her something she likes. Not diner scraps. Something better." Ethan hesitated. "I can't." "Take it," Mac insisted, eyes firm. You're a good man, soldier. Better than most of us. The other bikers watched in stunned silence. Ridge's eyes softened. Tank looked away, pretending not to care, but his jaw tightened. Ethan finally nodded. Thank you, he said quietly. She'll appreciate it. Mac gave a small nod, then turned toward the door. Before he stepped out, he paused and said, You said there's a line you don't cross. Guess I just learned what that means. He left the diner without another word, his boots echoing through the night. Ridge and Tank followed, the bell above the door jingling softly as the storm outside began to break. Ethan sat there for a long while after they'd gone, staring at the torn bag and the $50 bill. Darla refilled his coffee but didn't speak. Finally, she said, Funny how sometimes the worst people surprise you. Ethan smiled faintly. Sometimes they just need someone to remind them who they used to be. He packed the food, slipped the bill into his jacket pocket, and stood. The rain had slowed to a mist when he stepped outside, the air cool and clean. Somewhere in the distance, a motorcycle engine rumbled to life again, then faded into silence. Ethan looked up at the sky, whispered a quiet thank you, and walked toward the dim glow of the streetlights. Carrying leftovers, a paper bag, and a story his daughter would never forget. But what Ethan didn't know was that Mac wasn't done with him yet. Not by a long shot. The morning sun crept slowly over the horizon, painting the small town of Redwood in muted gold. Ethan's boots splashed through shallow puddles as he walked down the cracked sidewalk toward the old apartment building he and his daughter called home. The neighborhood was quiet. Too quiet. Paint peeled off walls, and broken mailboxes leaned tiredly against rusted posts. But to Ethan, it was home. He pushed open the creaky door to the building, and climbed the narrow staircase to the second floor. When he reached their apartment, the door opened before he could knock. Daddy! Leela ran into his arms, small and bright as sunlight after a storm. Her tangled brown hair brushed against his chin, and she smelled faintly of strawberries and crayons. Hey! Peanut, Ethan said, lifting her easily. You stay up late again. Aunt May let me watch a movie, she said proudly. But I fell asleep halfway. Ethan smiled at his sister May, who stood in the doorway wearing her nurse's scrubs. Her face was drawn with fatigue, but her eyes were warm. Row shift? He asked. The usual, she said with a sigh. Some days I feel like I'm patching up the world one broken person at a time. Ethan chuckled softly. You always were the fixer. May nodded toward the paper bag in his hand. Dinner. Breakfast, he said with a small grin. From that diner by Route 17. Leela perked up. Did you bring fries? Always, he said, setting the bag on the table. She clapped her hands and scrambled into her chair, humming some tune from her favorite cartoon as she ate. Ethan watched her quietly, his mind replaying the night before. The biker's sneer, the torn bag, the apology that came like a crack in stone. May noticed his faraway look. You okay? He nodded slowly. Yeah. Just had one of those nights. Makes you think. She poured him coffee and leaned on the counter. About what? About people, he said. How some of them carry more than you can see, even the ones who look like they're beyond saving. May gave him a knowing look. You met someone. Ethan smiled faintly. A biker, big guy. Loud, thought he was trouble at first. And he was. But then, he wasn't. She raised an eyebrow. Sounds like a story. He looked toward Leela, now dipping fries into ketchup with artistic concentration. Not one she needs to hear right now. May smiled. Then tell me later. He nodded. Yeah, later. But, later, would come sooner than he thought. Tuku that afternoon, the sound of motorcycle engines roared down the quiet street again. Ethan was outside fixing the old Ford pickup that hadn't run right since winter. When the rumble grew closer, he looked up, and his chest tightened. 3 bikes. Same ones from the diner. He wiped his hands on a rag and straightened, eyes narrowing slightly. The bikes rolled to a stop by the curb, chrome gleaming in the sunlight. Mac stepped off first, his expression unreadable. Ridge and Tank followed, quieter this time, less swagger and more purpose. Didn't expect to see you again, Ethan said carefully. Mac nodded. Yeah. Well, I didn't plan to come back. Leela peeked from the window upstairs, her small face framed by sunlight. Ethan noticed and subtly stepped forward, keeping himself between her and the men. What do you want? Ethan asked. Mac looked at the ground for a moment then back up. To talk. Not here to start anything. Ethan hesitated then nodded toward the porch. All right. Talk, Mac took a deep breath. After last night, I couldn't shake what you said. About that line you don't cross. He glanced toward the apartment window, where Leela had disappeared from sight. You were right. I crossed it. I've been crossing lines my whole damn life. Ethan said nothing. I've done a lot of things I ain't proud of. Mac continued. Ran with bad people. Hurt folks who didn't deserve it. I used to tell myself it didn't matter. That the world had already kicked me down, so why shouldn't I kick back? His voice cracked slightly. But seeing you last night, the way you picked that food off the floor, like it meant something, that hit me. Because it did mean something. Ridge stepped forward. He's been different since then. Said we needed to, I dunno, make it right somehow. A tank nodded. So we took a vote. Ethan frowned. A vote for what? A Mac reached into his jacket and pulled out a white envelope. We've got a club fund. Money we pool from jobs, rides, all that. Not much, but enough. He held out the envelope. It's for your daughter. Call it a fresh start. Groceries, rent, whatever you need. Ethan blinked, caught completely off guard. I can't take that. You don't even know us. Maybe not, Mac said. But I know what it's like to need help and have no one give a damn. The envelope trembled slightly in his hand. Ethan's throat tightened. He wanted to refuse. His pride screamed at him too. But then he thought of Leela. The school shoes she'd outgrown, the overdue bills tucked in a drawer, the nights he'd pretended not to be hungry so she could eat the last bit of dinner. He reached out slowly, accepting the envelope. I'll put it to good use, he said quietly. Thank you. A Mac nodded once. That's all I wanted to hear. Ridge smiled faintly. Guess we ain't all bad after all. A tank grinned. Don't get soft on me, Ridge. The tension eased slightly, but Ethan could see something else in Mac's eyes. Something heavy, unresolved. You did more than you know, Ethan said. You reminded me that even broken men can build something good again. A Mac exhaled, looking away as his voice dropped. You got no idea how much I needed to hear that. He turned, motioning for his crew. The engines roared back to life. As they mounted their bikes, Mac gave one last look at Ethan's window, where a small hand waved shyly through the glass. He smiled, an honest, wary smile, and raised 2 fingers in a gentle salute. Then they were gone. The sound of their engines faded into the distance, leaving behind the smell of exhaust and the faint echo of redemption. Ethan stood there, the envelope still in his hand, heart pounding with something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. But what neither he nor Mac knew was that fate had one more twist waiting for both of them. 2 days passed since the unexpected visit. Life, for a brief moment, began to feel almost normal again. The envelope Mac had given Ethan held more than just money. It held a strange kind of mercy. Inside was nearly $1,000, folded neatly, with a single note scribbled on a torn napkin. For Leela. Tell her there's still good left in the world. Ethan had stared at those words for a long time, wondering what kind of past a man like Mac carried that would make him write something so repentant. He didn't tell Leela where the money came from. He simply said a friend had helped them out. She had smiled in that simple, pure way children do, and gone back to coloring pictures of stars and flowers. By Thursday evening, the sky was clear again, washed clean by days of rain. The streets glowed amber under the lamplight. Ethan had spent the day running errands, fixing an old heater for his neighbor, and picking up a surprise for Leela. A small blue bicycle with white streamers that danced when the wind blew. He was tightening the last bolt when his phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar. Hello. There was silence for a moment. Then a rough voice came through, low and uncertain. Ethan. It's Mac. Ethan straightened. Mac, everything okay? Mac hesitated. Not really. I need a favor. Ethan's instinct kicked in. What happened? I can't explain everything over the phone, Mac said. But I'm in trouble. The kind that doesn't go away easy. Look, can we meet please? Somewhere quiet. Ethan looked toward the window where Leela was laughing with her aunt, showing off her new bike. His gut twisted. Every rational part of him said no. But something deeper, the soldier's instinct, the man who couldn't ignore someone reaching out for help, made him say, Where are you? Old Quarry Road. The gas station at the end of it. Mac's voice cracked. Come alone. And Ethan, thank you. The line went dead. The night was cold, the moon sharp against the black sky. Ethan's truck rattled along the empty stretch of road that led to the quarry. The gas station came into view. A lonely structure with a flickering light and rusted pumps. A single bike was parked out front. Mac stood beside it, smoking, shoulders hunched like a man carrying a world of weight. Ethan pulled up, stepped out slowly. "You look worse than the last time I saw you." Mac dropped the cigarette, crushing it under his boot. "You shouldn't have come." Ethan frowned. "You asked me to." "Yeah. And now I'm regretting it." Mac's eyes were restless, darting toward the dark tree line. "There's a crew after me. Old debts. They don't like that I gave that money away." Ethan tensed. "How bad are we talking?" "The kind that don't talk," Mac said. "They find me, they don't just take the cash. They make an example." Ethan's jaw clenched. "You could have gone to the cops." Mac laughed bitterly. "Men like me don't get to call the cops." Silence fell, thick and uneasy. Crickets chirped in the distance. Ethan crossed his arms. "So what's the favor?" Mac looked up, eyes hollow. "If something happens, I need you to make sure Ridge and Tank don't follow me down. They're good kids, just lost. And," he paused, voice breaking, "and I need you to tell that little girl of yours that the world isn't all bad because of men like me." Ethan shook his head. "You're not dying tonight, Mac." But before Mac could reply, headlights cut through the darkness. A black SUV roared up the gravel road, its tires spitting dirt. "Too late," Mac muttered. 3 men climbed out, all leather, ink and menace. One of them, a tall, cold-eyed man with a snake tattoo coiled around his neck, stepped forward. "Mac, you got nerve showing your face." "Didn't have a choice," Mac said quietly. Snake sneered. "You had a choice when you gave our money away." Ethan's stomach dropped. "That money. Club stash," Mac said under his breath. "Didn't think they'd track it this fast." Snake's gaze shifted to Ethan. "Who's the Boy Scout?" "Friend," Mac said. "Then he dies with you." The world seemed to slow. Snake's hand twitched toward his jacket. Ethan's instincts, those hardwired reflexes born from years in combat, took over. "Don't," Ethan warned, voice like steel. "This doesn't have to go that way." But Snake only smiled. The flash of metal came next. A gun. Ethan moved before the man could aim. The next seconds blurred into chaos. The gun went off, the echo cracking through the night. Ethan lunged, knocking Snake off balance. The gun clattered across the gravel. Mac dove for it, grabbed it, then froze. For the first time that night, Ethan saw fear in Mac's eyes. "Go," Ethan hissed. "Get out of here!" But Mac didn't move. He looked at the gun, then back at the men advancing toward them. "No," he said quietly. "No more running." The next sound was another shot, louder, closer. Snake fell to his knees, clutching his arm, howling in pain. The other 2 hesitated, then bolted back to the SUV. Tires screeched, gravel sprayed, and within seconds, they were gone. Mac stood there shaking, the gun trembling in his hand. Ethan approached slowly. "It's over." Mac's voice was hollow. "Not for me." He tossed the gun aside and sank to his knees. "You don't come back from things like this, Ethan." Ethan knelt beside him, gripping his shoulder. "You just did." But Mac shook his head. "No, you saved me. Twice now. Don't waste it." Ethan looked at him, a storm of emotion behind his eyes. "Then prove it. Go back. Start over. You've got people who still believe in you." Mac's voice cracked. "No one believes in me." "I do," Ethan said. The words hit like a thunderclap. For the first time in years, Mac's hardened expression broke. His eyes filled, and he let out a breath that sounded like a lifetime of regret leaving his body. The sirens wailed in the distance. Someone must have heard the shots. Mac stood slowly, looking out toward the horizon. "Guess this is where our roads split," he said quietly. "Doesn't have to be," Ethan replied. But Mac only smiled faintly. "Yeah, it does." He turned, walking into the shadows of the trees, his silhouette swallowed by the night before the flashing red and blue lights appeared down the road. Ethan stayed there until the police arrived, his heart pounding with dread and hope all tangled together. He didn't know if he'd ever see Mac again. But something told him this wasn't the end. Not yet. Morning broke gray and heavy. The world outside Ethan's window was quiet, yet his mind was anything but. Sleep had been impossible after what happened at the quarry. He'd told the police only what they needed to hear. 2 men attacked him and a friend, shots were fired, no one dead. Mac's name never left his lips. He wasn't sure if it was loyalty or instinct. But deep down, he knew Mac had already paid enough for the life he'd lived. Now, as the first rays of dawn filtered through the curtains, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee gone cold. Leela still slept, her small frame curled under a blanket patterned with stars. The sight of her brought both calm and ache. She was his reason to fight, and the only thing that kept him from giving in to the ghosts that followed him. The soft knock on the door startled him. He tensed immediately. It was too early for visitors. He stood, moved quietly, and opened it just enough to see. To his shock, Ridge stood there. Alone. He looked different. His leather jacket gone, replaced by a simple flannel shirt. His hair was messy. His eyes tired. "Hey," Ridge said softly. "Can I come in?" Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah. Keep your voice down. My kid's asleep." Ridge stepped inside, eyes flicking nervously toward the hallway. "You hear from Mac?" Ethan shook his head. "Not since last night." Ridge's jaw tightened. "He's gone, Ethan. The cops were at the club this morning. They're looking for him. Snakey's crew made some calls. Word is, Mac shot him. He's on the run." Ethan rubbed a hand over his face. He didn't want to shoot. He was defending himself. "I know that," Ridge said. "But the law doesn't care about stories. They see a biker with a record and a gun. They don't ask questions." Ethan's chest ached with frustration. "He saved my life." Ridge nodded. "Yeah, and now he's paying for it." He hesitated before pulling something from his pocket. A small, folded note. "He left this at the clubhouse for you." Ethan took it slowly, his heart pounding. The paper was torn, the handwriting rough but familiar. "Ethan, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Not dead, just gone. Don't come looking. You got a kid who needs you, and I already took enough of your time. But there's one more thing I need from you. Find Ridge. Tell him he's better than this life. Tell him not to wait until it's too late, like I did. You said broken men can build something good again. I'm trying to believe that. Maybe one day, I'll prove you right." Ethan's hands trembled as he read it. Ridge watched, silent. Guilt flickering in his eyes. "He meant it," Ethan said softly. "Every word." Ridge looked down. "He was like a brother to me. Rough around the edges, yeah, but when Snake took over, Mac tried to keep the peace. I didn't listen. None of us did. Now he's out there alone, hunted." Ethan folded the note carefully. "He's not alone. Not as long as someone remembers what he tried to change." For a moment, the two men sat in silence. The morning light spilled across the table, golden and soft. Ridge finally spoke. He said something once. "Back when we were younger. Said the road always gives you one last chance to turn around. You just gotta be brave enough to take it." Ethan smiled faintly. "Sounds like him." Ridge looked up. "I'm done with the club, Ethan. I don't want that life anymore. I just don't know where to start." Ethan leaned forward, eyes steady. "Start by being the man Mac thought you could be." Ridge exhaled shakily, nodding. "You think he'll make it? Wherever he's going?" "I think he already did," Ethan said quietly. Just by walking away. Later that afternoon, after Ridge left, Ethan drove out to the small chapel on the edge of town. The same one he'd taken Lila to on her mother's anniversary. He sat there in the empty pews, sunlight streaming through stained glass, casting fractured rainbows across the worn wood. He pulled out the note again and read it slowly. There was something sacred in those words. Not because of what they said, but because of who wrote them. Mac wasn't a saint. He'd done things Ethan could never condone. But that night at the diner, when he'd handed Ethan that envelope, something inside the man had shifted. And once a soul starts to shift, it can't ever go fully back. Ethan folded the note and tucked it inside his jacket. "You found your line, Mac," he whispered. "You finally drew it." When he stepped outside, the air smelled like rain again. Clean and alive. Leela was waiting at the truck, her new blue bike beside her. "Daddy, can we go to the park?" she asked, eyes bright with the simple joy of a child untouched by the darkness of grown-up lives. Ethan smiled. "Yeah, Peanut, let's go." As they drove, the wind carried the faint rumble of motorcycles somewhere far off. Fading, distant, almost ghost-like. He looked to the horizon, wondering if Mac was out there, riding toward something new. He hoped so. Because for the first time in years, Ethan believed in second chances. And somewhere deep down, he knew Mac was chasing his. But fate wasn't done testing them yet. Not by a long shot. 3 weeks passed. The days grew warmer, and the first hints of spring painted the small town with color again. For Ethan and Leela, life found a fragile rhythm. Mornings filled with laughter and cereal crumbs, afternoons with bike rides and sunlight. But every night, when the world went still, Ethan would glance at the folded note tucked inside his wallet and wonder where Mac was. Or if he was even alive. He tried to push the thought away, but something about that man, his voice, his brokenness, his quiet act of redemption, lingered like a shadow that refused to fade. One Friday evening, while Ethan fixed the mailbox outside, a sound broke the quiet hum of the neighborhood. The low, distant growl of a motorcycle. It drew closer, echoing against the houses, slow and deliberate. Ethan straightened, heart suddenly thudding hard. A single bike turned onto the street. But it wasn't Mac, it was Ridge. He pulled up in front of the apartment, engine rumbling to silence. He looked different again. Clean cut, sober, eyes clearer than Ethan had ever seen them. He held a worn leather satchel slung over his shoulder. Ethan met him halfway. "You look like a man with news," he said cautiously. Ridge nodded, his voice quiet. "Yeah. I found him." Ethan froze. "Mac." Ridge swallowed hard. "He's alive." "Barely." The words hit like thunder. Ethan's voice dropped. "We're about 50 miles north," Ridge said. "An old mechanic shop outside Fairview. He's been hiding out, fixing bikes for cash. But he's sick, Ethan, real sick. Guess those years of drinking and fighting caught up to him. I tried to get him to a hospital, but he won't go." Ethan didn't hesitate. "Take me to him." Ridge hesitated. "He said you shouldn't come." Ethan's eyes hardened. "He doesn't get to decide that." The drive north felt endless. The old truck rattled over cracked roads and through miles of open field until the sun dipped low behind the pines. Ridge led the way on his bike, headlights cutting through the dusk. When they finally pulled into the gravel lot of the mechanic shop, Ethan saw a figure sitting on the porch steps. Head bowed, a cigarette glowing faintly between calloused fingers. Mac. He looked smaller somehow. Thinner. The leather jacket hung loose on his frame, and his once fiery eyes had dimmed to wary embers. When he saw Ethan, a faint smile tugged at his lips. "You're a stubborn man," he rasped. Ethan stepped forward, stopping just short of him. "You didn't think I'd let you disappear that easy, did you?" Mac chuckled weakly. "Didn't think you'd want to see me like this." Ethan crouched down. "You're still breathing. That's enough for me." Mac coughed, the sound harsh and ragged. "Guess the road finally caught up. Can't run forever." Ridge leaned against the wall nearby, silent but watchful. Ethan glanced around the shop, half-fixed bikes, empty bottles, a mattress in the corner. The air smelled of oil and dust and something heavier. Resignation. "Why didn't you call me?" Ethan asked quietly. "Because you got a kid who needs her father," Mac said. "I already took enough of your time." "You gave me something, Ethan. That night in the diner, you made me see myself for what I'd become. And I've been trying, really trying, to make peace with that." Ethan's throat tightened. "You don't have to do it alone." Mac's eyes lifted to meet his, pale and tired. "That's the thing, soldier. Some battles, you're meant to fight alone. Not because no one cares, but because it's the only way to make it right." Ridge turned away, blinking hard. Ethan sat beside Mac, both staring at the horizon, where the last light of day burned orange and gold. "You remember what you told me?" Ethan said softly. "That the road always gives you one last chance to turn around." Mac chuckled faintly. "Yeah. Guess this was mine. It doesn't have to end here," Ethan said. But Mac shook his head. "I'm tired, brother. For the first time, I ain't angry. I ain't running. I'm just tired. But you got something I never had. A reason. Don't waste it." Ethan wanted to argue, to pull him up and force him into the truck. But one look at Mac's frail form stopped him. The man was already halfway gone, his body giving out even as his soul began to mend. Mac took a slow, trembling breath. "Tell your little girl, she made a stranger remember what kindness feels like." Ethan's vision blurred. "You can tell her yourself. Come back with me." Mac smiled faintly, the corners of his lips trembling. Maybe, someday. But deep down, Ethan knew, someday wouldn't come. They stayed until the stars came out. When Ethan finally rose to leave, Mac handed him a small metal object. A rusted dog tag, scuffed and faded. "What's this?" Ethan asked. "My old call sign," Mac said with a smirk. "Back when I thought I was untouchable. Figured a soldier should have it." Ethan looked at the tag. Stamped faintly into the metal were the words, Mike H. Rod Mtion Row AD. He wanted to say something, but words failed. He placed a hand on Mac's shoulder instead, and Mac nodded once in silent understanding. When Ethan drove away, Ridge stayed behind. He promised he'd look after the man who'd once been his leader. And, in some ways, his savior. By the time Ethan reached home, the dawn had begun to rise again, Leela ran to him as soon as he stepped inside, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Daddy, where'd you go?" she asked sleepily. He smiled, eyes glistening. "To see a friend." "Is he okay?" Ethan looked out the window, where the first light touched the world in gold. "He will be," he said softly. "I finally found his peace." Weeks later, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address, just his name. Inside was a single photo: 3 men in leather jackets standing beside their bikes. Sunlight spilling behind them. Max stood in the center, smiling faintly, a bandage on his arm and a look of quiet pride in his eyes. On the back, in rough handwriting, were 3 words. "Still on the road." Ethan smiled through the tears that filled his eyes. He pinned the photo above his desk, right beside a crayon drawing Leela had made of the 2 of them holding hands beneath a blue sky. Sometimes, at night, when he closed his eyes, he could still hear the faint hum of a motorcycle fading into the distance. A reminder that redemption isn't found in perfection. It's found in the courage to turn back, to make amends, to try again. And somewhere out there, on a long stretch of highway beneath a rising sun,